I've been in the business about 25 years. And when Carrie asked me to be involved with this, I was super excited because I think that this is a subject as an industry we don't talk enough about. I think there's a huge stigma attached to it, particularly if you're in the field of audio or if you're a musician. The reason I'm touched personally by it is I have two of my three children were born with they were born with sensorineural hearing loss, which if you don't know what that means, you're about to find out. And so I've spent the better part of the last 15 years just immersing myself, learning everything I can about pediatric hearing loss, advocacy, special ed law. And as a result of it, it really heightened my sensitivity and awareness about working in a high risk environment, not only as individuals subjecting ourselves to a high risk environment, but also what that means to the patrons that come to see our shows. So I think this is an important first step, and also it's Better Hearing and Speech Month, so it's a fabulous way to celebrate that. But this is a great first step in terms of starting a conversation, having a conversation, destigmatizing. Hopefully at the end of today, not only will you leave with a greater awareness and understanding about hearing loss, but also some sense of hope that this is not a career ender. It's not something to be ashamed of, and there shouldn't be any stigma or taboo attached to it. But part of minimizing that is to be able to talk about it and feel free to talk about it and not be worried about talking about it. So we got a ton of really great questions from everyone. Oh, before I get any further, I'm sorry. If you want to turn on your captions in Zoom, you can go down to the live transcript and select the captions. It's the automated captions in Zoom. We have three incredible panelists. We have an audiologist and two people that have hearing loss themselves, one a musician and one an engineer. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce, let's start with you, Julie.
Hi, everybody. Just a little intro. Okay. I'm Julie Glick. I'm an audiologist for, 24 years, with the past 12 focused on musicians and sound engineers' needs. My practice is now located in Los Angeles, called Musicians Hearing Solutions. I was formerly in New York for 10 years, but moved here about 4 years ago. So so I have a specialized practice working with custom in-ear monitors, custom musicians' earplugs, diagnostic hearing testing, and hearing aids. I'll work with anybody, but I have a special niche working with this group. So it adds a little fun to the subject, and so it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Scott, you want to go next?
My name is Scott Simons. I'm a musician. I've lived my whole life with a hearing loss, and I am part of the music team on America's Got Talent. I play piano for the show. This is my 9th year, I think, that we're working on now. I sing the theme song for Paw Patrol, and I'm a songwriter and just like freelance musician living in Los Angeles. So and I got here because I was getting fitted for some earplugs. I got recommended to Julie as an audiologist, and luckily I found her because then I was able to purchase some great new hearing aids that changed my whole situation last summer. So that's my spiel.
Cool. Swan?
That's you.
Hi there, my name is Swan Barrett. I'm a front of house engineer and tour manager. I've been doing that for about 15 years. I live in Vancouver, BC, and I was a technical director in a few venues here in town, and been touring across North America and Europe for the past 10 years. And I started having hearing loss. Mostly, I really noticed it in the past 5 years, and I was fitted with hearing aids 5 years ago now. And they really, allowed me to keep doing my job. So I'm excited to talk about that.
I just really want to commend both Scott and Swan for being willing to do this, because I think a lot of people are less comfortable being open about their hearing loss for fear of it, affecting either their employability or the perception of their ability to do their job. And I think there are many, many other people like Scott and Swan out there that maybe are less comfortable talking about it. And hopefully, thanks to people like you being brave enough to share your stories, it will inspire other people to do the same. So I want to jump straight in. We've got a lot of ground to cover, especially with all the great questions that we got. I'm going to break the webinar into 4 sections. We're going to start with understanding hearing loss. Then we're going to move into living with hearing loss. Then hearing health and hearing loss prevention, and then closing with advocacy. Julie's probably going to do a lot of the heavy lifting in this first section. So Julie, can you start by discussing types of hearing loss, conductive, sensorineural, anything else you want to give an overview on regarding?
Sure. So yeah, so there are 3 types of hearing loss. The first and probably the most common is called sensorineural. So sensory is your cochlea, your sensory organ of hearing, and neural is your hearing nerve. So this is when hearing loss is affected by the hair cells and or the hearing nerve of your inner ear. It's probably most common to see this as we are getting older. So much like, needing glasses to magnify writing or anything really, as you get older, a sensorineural hearing loss is pretty common as far as that goes. But also it can be seen, you can be born with it, genetic, there's all different reasons for it to occur. The next type is conductive. So that involves the mechanical portion of your hearing. So either and or your eardrum. So your eardrum is what is responsible for amplifying the sound that's brought into it through the ear canal. It could be because of the 3 tiny little bones just past your eardrum, which is what Swan and actually I have. So those 3 little bones can calcify, causing them not to be able to amplify sound. It usually happens more gradually over time that would occur, and that's typically a genetic type of a hearing loss. Although I have it and nobody in my family will claim ownership to it, but somebody had to have had it down the line. So, and it can also involve the eustachian tube, which is what equalizes pressure from inside your head to the environment. And most typically conductive losses can be treated medically. So, yeah, so either, for a child, maybe an ear infection, fluid behind the eardrum, that can be treated medically and resolved. Otosclerosis, which is what I have and what Swan has, you can either treat it with hearing aids, or surgery is actually an option, but it's a very rare type of a hearing loss. It only accounts for about 10%. And then certainly if there's damage to the eardrum, that either repairs itself or you can have it fixed by an otologist. So, and then there's the third type is a combination of the 2. So mixed hearing loss. So sensorineural combination in combination with conductive hearing loss. And for that, it's just a combo. So either you have a conductive loss like what I have, and then over time, as we get older, you add in the noise-induced hearing loss, or as you get older, hearing loss. There's all sorts of reasons. And that's why a hearing test is really crucial, because it really paints a picture of your hearing health, and it tells us exactly what's going on. I hope that summarizes it. And I should go back and say noise-induced hearing loss is sensorineural. So affecting the inner ear, the cochlea, the sensory organ of hearing. Noise-induced or loud sound-induced. So I don't necessarily think that music is always noise, right? But I think traditionally people call it noise-induced. I call it loud sound-induced.
Great. And a little known fact that I certainly didn't know, I had 2 children born with hearing loss, but 1 out of 1,200 children born is some form of permanent hearing loss. So it's the #1 birth defect in all children.
Yeah, and so something to detect it, it's mandatory. Otoacoustic emission testing is done on all infants that they have to pay. Yeah. So that's the first thing you do. That's part of the newborn screening. So
that is right.
Early on.
Could you describe so you touched on it, there's noise-induced or loud sound-induced hearing loss, there's age-induced hearing loss. Are there other ways to lose your hearing if you're not born with hearing loss?
Well, sure. There's genetic hearing loss that can happen, you know, over time, eventually start showing up. There are ear pathologies such as Meniere's disease that has, one of the symptoms is a low frequency hearing loss that fluctuates, oral fullness, and ringing, tinnitus, whatever you'd like to call it, tinnitus, I had someone call it. Then there's also acoustic tumors, so acoustic neuromas that can cause hearing loss. So that's typically an asymmetric or unilateral hearing loss. So one ear is different than the other. We want to generally be symmetric, right? So if we're not, we want to figure out why we're not. Like if my knee hurts, my right knee hurts, and my left, like what's the cause? And sometimes it can just be as is, right? But we need to check that out, typically with an MRI or CT scan. Sudden hearing loss is another type that can happen just out of nowhere. And hopefully can either resolve itself or through treatment of steroids. Let's see, did I miss anything?
I want to touch a little bit more on the sudden hearing loss, because I think, and we talked about this prior, I'm sure many of you have seen Sound of Metal. We are not going to dig into that movie in the context of this webinar. Both Julie and I know, have some issues with some of the misrepresentations that are in that film, but it has certainly, I think, heightened awareness about sudden hearing loss. Between that and maybe some other stories we've heard in the news about musicians suddenly retiring because of sudden hearing loss. Like, how common is it? Can you just expand?
It's not common. It's not common, but certainly, and it typically only happens in one ear, and it's typically more of a high frequency hearing loss. So let's just put it this way. You know, if something happens to your hearing suddenly and you feel a change, you address it immediately, right? We hope that it's going to be just wax blocking your eardrum and easily rectified. That's probably more common than a sudden, that's definitely more common than a sudden hearing loss. But to lose hearing in both ears, in the implication of the movie, I actually wrote an article about it. You can find it on my website, and I go into a lot more detail. But to lose it like that, it's just extremely, extremely rare. Not only that, if you have hearing loss as a musician or sound engineer, there's so much that can be done. We've got so much technology. This is not a career ender, okay, at all. So that's good, hopeful thing. There, you can custom tune in-ears. You can, you know, really dig into it. If you got to be willing, though, right? You got to be willing to want to rectify it and do the right thing. Did that answer? Yeah. So the sudden hearing loss that you see in Sound of Metal is not accurate. And also, he didn't. I'm not going to go into it, but it's, you can read the article that I wrote.
To the article in the chat, and there's also a link to it on Sound Girls. So yes, it makes for some good reading.
Yeah.
Real quick, because we're not going to get into the minutia of understanding an audiogram today, but I do want to talk quick about how hearing loss is measured, because I think sometimes people will say, oh, I have 50% hearing loss, and that's really not an accurate way or representative way to measure hearing loss. And I'm going to attempt to share my screen. If you could just talk about like normal, mild, moderate, you know, how hearing loss is measured.
Sure. So, okay. So so in a hearing test is typically, you're going to see a hearing test. A standard hearing test measures from 250 hertz to 8,000 hertz. I actually test out to 20,000 because of the population that I work with, and I find it extremely revealing. So basically, we're testing your hearing to find the softest sound that you're able to hear, right? Because we know if you can hear the soft sounds, you can hear the loud ones. So basically, it's how much volume does it take for you to hear a pure tone at each frequency. So hearing with the normal limits is considered, well, your chart says 20 and less, but it's actually 25 and less across the board. And it's also frequency specific. So in other words, you can have normal hearing in the lows and then a high frequency, you know, more of a high frequency hearing loss, which is what we see as we get older, or noise-induced hearing loss is between 2,500 hertz and 6,000 hertz. So it's really divided not only across the board, but by frequency. Right, exactly. So
So here's
normal,
for instance.
yeah, 25 and less is within normal limits. 40 and less or 45 is considered a mild loss. Moderate, severe, moderate, severe. So it's really categorized depending on the frequency. You can see in the hearing test results up on the top through about 2K, we're within normal limits. And then as we get to 3K, this would be considered moderate, severe, and then it raises back up. So this is a great example of a probably most likely, mostly noise-induced, I call it tone deficiency, because it's pretty confusing. Someone with this type of hearing loss is gonna, for the most part, hear okay. It's just the clarity is gonna be an issue. So it's really sneaky because the hearing was normal through 2K, right?
Yeah.
The lows and the mids are good, but then the high frequency, the clarity of sound is missing. So it's, and I would have to see the age of that person, know a lot more about that person's background to comment more on it. But this is the shape, the decrease around 3 to 4K, and then the rise to, the rise up at around, looks like 8K. I have to put my glasses on. There we go. Yeah. So that looks like a noise induced, or it could be a combination.
Yeah, and I want to just jump in real quick. For those of you that do not speak frequencies in decibels, which I really didn't until having children, where I had to read these audiograms, is the top shows the frequencies and then the left side is showing you decibels. So basically, this person can't hear that frequency unless it's turned up at 60 decibels.
In the right ear. So yeah, so the circles are the, if you wanted me to go, you're right. I skipped that.
All that.
Yeah, the circles are and traditionally the circles are the red circles are right, and the blue, well, for mine are blue X's are left. So, but
I like this one too, because something you're going to hear a lot about, especially if you go to the audiologist, is speech sounds. This is also very important for children developing language. And so this is where all the speech sounds reside on your audiogram. So if you're hearing, if you are lacking hearing in the high frequencies, if you can't hear the sounds, you can't produce the sounds. In the case,
you can't produce the sound, but you also, consonants give meaning to words. So, if you just have consonants, you can probably guess the word, but having only vowels, it could be a million. So changing a word from sit to fit, right? So consonants are really important. So the F, the S, the TH, give meaning to words. So
I am going to stop sharing that. And then Swan and Scott, would you guys mind briefly describing your type of hearing loss or level of hearing loss and how long you've had it?
Yeah, for sure. Actually, I have my my audiogram ready. I can share that on my screen if you guys want to see that. Actually, I don't really know how that works. Share screen here. So this is my audiogram. So as Julie said, I have otosclerosis, which is a genetic condition. So what I have is mostly conductive hearing loss. So the tiny bones that amplify the sound calcify, and so they don't move, and they can't amplify the sound as well. So I have moderate to severe hearing loss. You can see on my screen. It's actually, it's evolved a lot in the past 5 years. It's a progressive hearing loss. So it started at first where it was mostly just the low end. I couldn't hear really like anything, not anything, but at quite a loss below 500 to 600 hertz. So for me, I noticed it at first because I had a really hard time understanding people with low tone voices, especially if they mumbled a lot. But I still had clarity. The highs were pretty fine in my ears, and then within a couple of years, it degraded quite a bit. And actually, at first it was my right ear, then my left ear caught up with it. And so now, I don't know how Julie would describe my audiogram, but it's kind of flat, I guess.
well, yeah, it does raise up, and you've got Yeah, I mean, it would be moderate to severe in the lows to mids, and then it raises up to more moderate in the mid to highs. So, but conductive hearing losses are easier to treat with hearing aids because we simply just need to amplify the sound. In other words, you know, your word recognition should be good. Sometimes with hearing aids, you know, the reason why hearing aids get bad raps is because the hearing nerve isn't transferring the sound clearly. With a mechanical issue with your hearing, if we just make it louder, it's just going to be better, right? It's not a matter of you know, a distortion with the hearing nerve. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. So yeah, with the conductive hearing loss, it's a lot easier. People are most successful with hearing aids because of that, because it's just turn them all up and it's going to sound good.
Yeah, that's for sure. And
Whereas the
like when
hearing loss,
if something is loud, yeah, I can hear it.
Discrimination. So
Great. Scott, you want to jump in?
Yeah. I think, I mean, I know I was born with a hearing loss. My mom has one, and her father, my grandfather, had one. So I think they were aware to look for it. I think it was first recognized maybe when I was in kindergarten. My kindergarten teacher, who I recently ran into when I was visiting my hometown, even said, like, I never knew if Scott was just ignoring me or couldn't hear me. And that's pretty much still the case with everyone that I hang out with. I'll cop to both of those. But I didn't wear my first hearing aid till I was 18. I probably should have gotten two, but I had a lot of stigma about not wanting to wear two, especially, you know, I'm 44. So this would have been around like 18. When was that? 1994. I don't know what the technology was at the time, if there wasn't completely in the canal, but I would have had to wear something noticeable, and I just wasn't ready. And I did get one. Oh yeah, I did get one that was in the canal first, and I just wore one in my right ear for 18 years until I was 36. And I was working on America's Got Talent in New York, and my hearing aid crapped out, and I couldn't work, and I freaked out. I went to an audiologist in New York, and she was so upset that I didn't have two hearing aids. She said that I was doing damage to my left ear by not treating my hearing. And I finally got a pair of hearing aids, you know, what would that be, 8 years ago? And I just got another pair, these Widex Moments. So my hearing loss, I mean, I can share my audiogram. I was working on it whilst I was like, oh, that's a good idea, Swan. I should have had that prepared. So I prepared it while she was talking. And honestly, Julie can probably tell you more what it says than I can, but that's my hearing loss. I don't know what causes you know, Julie, do you know why my left ear could that be from not wearing a hearing aid, or is that just
no. Well, I mean, for you, we figured we did we checks and balances. So you had this CAT scan or the MRI to be sure, right? So the right ear, so your right ear, that's a little like, well, yeah, it's more flat, right? So moderate in the lows and the low frequencies to the mids. And then the left ear's got a more severe hearing loss in the high frequencies, but you can see the A's at the top, that's aided results. So with the hearing instruments on, Scott does great, right? So that's just the testing in the booth with the aids on. So we're up in the normal limits. I think we could do better. We did make an adjustment to the highs, didn't we, after that?
Yeah.
To do better, and then we have to retest it still. So
and I think like in like real world, like tangible, like what does it sound like? It just sounds like I have my hands over my ears generally. I mean, like if I'm sitting in my apartment, I live right next to Santa Monica Boulevard, which is really loud, so it's kind of a perk. I can just take out my hearing aids and I really don't hear what's going on outside. I live right across the street from a firehouse, so I do hear that. But in general, it's just like a muffled kind of, I just don't have clarity, and like I don't hear like the general whoosh of sound that happens in life, you know, like I just don't hear like cars going by necessarily if I'm like halfway down the street or something. But if I put my hearing aids in, I hear everything. I think I'm hearing everything at least, and I can function completely in conversations. And you know, like if I'm having a conversation with someone and we're pretty close, like not friendly, but I mean like close proximity wise. I can understand them pretty much without my hearing aids, but it just like takes so much effort off of my shoulders to just have my hearing aids on. And I went to dinner with friends last night in a loud environment outside, and I could hear everything perfectly well, including the tables next to us.
Great.
That also segues into sort of where we're at with technology now as compared to even 10 years ago. Technology that exists is phenomenal, and what it can do, particularly in noisy situations, really, you know, I think for a lot of people with hearing loss, distance and noise are the two evils, right? The further away the speaker is and the louder the environment is. And hearing aids
and face masks.
and face masks. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. So Julie, just real quick, can you just touch on available amplification options, hearing aids, cochlear implants, anything that might be relevant to our conversation?
Yeah, I mean, most typically it'd be a hearing aids, right? So cochlear implants, you have to be a specific candidate for. So
Can you just describe what that is? Because a lot of people will ask, why don't my kids have cochlear implants?
So to be eligible or to be a candidate for cochlear implants, you have to have severe to profound hearing loss in both ears, and then no benefit from traditional hearing aids amplification. Because anytime you do surgery, right, you risk losing something. So we want to,
in the case of a cochlear implant.
and right, because it's exactly. So with Swan, the surgery I had, it's different. The risks are much less, and it's a much different surgery. There's so many intricacies and different things that can happen with your hearing. People just don't realize, right? So for cochlear implants, right, so you have to have no benefit from amplification, and then typically you would get one and then have it turned on and then the other. It certainly doesn't sound like, you know, normal hearing, but it's amazing. I mean, it truly is amazing, I think. Amazing option if you want it, right?
Well, and one of the misconceptions that I certainly was frustrated by with the movie we touched on earlier is the idea that you get a cochlear implant, turn it on, and you're off to the races. Yeah. It's not an accurate representation. It takes months of therapy retraining your brain to recognize that as real sound, and then over time,
and you wouldn't put two on at once, and you certainly wouldn't get on an airplane to Paris. Sorry, that's just not going to happen in real life. So yeah, I mean, it's the sound design team did a great job, I think, representing hearing loss, how it sounds. That actually was a great part of the movie. And then also, you know, with the cochlear implants, now that's not my specialty. So, but they don't sound like normal hearing. And you can just, you know, Google, go to the cochlear implant companies to hear samples. But regardless, hearing aid technology has come a long way. And Scott, you're right. I mean, I've been doing this 24 years. And when I started, really, we just had analog hearing aids with potentiometers. I could make adjustments with the screwdriver, lows, mids, highs, volume, maybe not even, it'd be lows and highs, maybe volume, bye. And then programmable hearing aids came out, and the CIC, completely in the canal, came out. Actually, Widex was the first company to come out with that right around 1996, 97. From there, I mean, hearing aid companies are always looking to improve sound quality and hearing and noise, because those are the biggest problems, right? So, and even if your hearing's normal, you can have trouble hearing and noise, but more so if you have hearing loss. And actually, today's technology, if you have dual microphones, now there's apps, you can make a lot of discrete adjustments. These can actually put you in an advantage over people who don't wear hearing aids. So, you know, there's the cell phone calls go straight through the hearing instruments, which is a huge advantage, because anytime you can bring sound directly to your ears, you're going to hear better. And there's a computer chip analyzing the sound, making adjustments to unwanted steady state noises. I think if you put on hearing aids for the first time and you have a hearing loss, you're going to go outside and go, you know, so
adjustment period.
Yeah,
to readjust.
Absolutely. So yeah, and it's not like whenever I start, you get in most of the United States, you get a 45-day trial. So, you know, in that time, I always tell people, unless you're experienced wearing them, right, that we're not off to the races. You know, it's like you wouldn't get up and run a marathon. People usually let hearing loss go for at least 8 years on average, right? So, And by the time you do something about it, it takes time, you know, to start hearing sounds. It sometimes sounds mechanical. You hear your own voice differently. I mean, things change. That's what we want, but it takes time to get adjusted to it. And eventually the hearing nerve does. And if it doesn't, maybe you're not fit with the right product for your needs. I think when we,
I was going to interject and say, like, even just switching brands, we walked outside of Julie's office in Beverly Hills, and that makes me sound way more bougie than I am, but
and me too, by the way.
and we walked outside and I was like, I hate these hearing aids. I just want my old ones back. I mean, and it took me about a week, and I've been wearing hearing aids the majority of my life. So just switching brands gave me a little bit of a jolt of like whatever. And now if I were to go back to my old hearing aids, which I thought were phenomenal at the time, and they would sound like it would be like watching a movie in like 2D as compared to like 3D. Like I can really hear a depth and a richness of sound, and I can hear it's just completely different animal, but my brain didn't know how to process it when I first put them on.
Right, it takes time. And I did something with Scott, you know, it was so funny you said, are we going to get in trouble? We tried I gave him a few different hearing aids to try all at once, which is not traditional, but since he had been experienced with them, and I really was pushing for him.
Like 6 at the same time.
6 at the same time, 1 up the nose, and yeah. But since he was experienced, and I really was pushing for you to try Widex over what you were wearing. So, because I thought it was going to make a big difference. So we did that. So, you know, people generally should do well unless they, you know, have the hearing nerve isn't transferring the sound clearly to the brain. That's something that, you know, a hearing aid is a prosthetic. So unfortunately, you know, and even if your hearing's normal, there are a lot of environments that are just simply hard to hear in, right? Sound, you know, high ceilings, hard floors, sound like any concert hall, you know, just can be hard. So, but in general, if you get hearing instruments, you should feel like you do well. If you're not, then that's probably the wrong instrument for you, and you should switch and try something else. So
the
I don't know if I answered that question completely, but there's tons of accessories to stream television through hearing instruments wirelessly, take cell phone calls, stream music, you know, it's just, and the apps that you can make changes to the sound quality, choose directionality, you know, even FM accessories like your kids probably use in school, where you get sound directly to your ear. I mean, they really can put you in an advantage, you know, and as they should be, right?
Yes, I think the takeaway here is the technology right now is phenomenal. It only gets better every year. Every you know, it's kind of like keeping up with Apple computers, but in terms of hearing technology, it really is seismic how much it's progressed in a relatively short amount of time. And then with that, for adults, it brings quality of life. You know, you don't have to say huh and what. You don't have to struggle to hear in a restaurant. And the connectivity piece is particularly important. You know, you used to have to wear things around your neck to be able to connect to a phone or connect to a television. Now it all happens through your hearing aids.
Well, that depends on the kind of hearing aids you have. Yeah.
This is one of my kids' hearing aids. This is quite a bulky one, but I just wanted to use it as an example because kids' hearing aids tend to be a little bigger and bulkier because of what they have to do in terms of classroom amplification and some other things. Adult hearing aids now, especially this is the behind the ear style, they're like half the size of this. And this is Scott's. Scott's goes directly into his ear canal, so you don't even see it. But you can even do a behind the ear hearing aid that's tiny. And, you know, using molds like this is
you don't even see it. Yeah.
And this is used commonly for kids just because it's a little bit more resilient. Swan, do you mind showing your hearing aid? He has what's called a receiver in ear, which is, it's almost like a little fishing line. This is the style my older son wears. You can't even see it. They're tiny.
No, you can't really see it. And yeah, but what you were saying about the technology just changing really rapidly. For me, this is my 3rd pair of hearing aids within 5 years. I was on the DCM program where I got a new model. And I was completely blown away with the difference between my first and my second, and my second and my third. Like the quality I have now, like I could not have imagined it just even 4 years ago. And the connectivity, like right now I'm streaming the audio from my laptop straight to my hearing aid with, you know, little streaming thing. And yeah, I hooked up my record player straight to my hearing aids, which has been really nice to do, you know, and like everything on my phone just yeah, that makes a big difference in being able to change settings in different environments, having different programs. Like I had my audiologist make me a program specifically for concerts, so I could, have the proper settings when I was at work.
Right.
It makes it.
You can have a
such a
soft
big
sound
difference.
setting, a loud sound setting. There's so many options. I want to try to progress through a few of the. This phone never rings. Sorry. In oh gosh, sorry. Who uses landlines anymore? One thing that is very intimidating, and this is actually a question from someone attending, was hearing aids are so expensive, often thousands of dollars. You do not have to tell me. It's like the price of a MacBook Pro on each ear, not just one, and not covered by most health insurance. Why and how do you think high quality hearing aids could be made more accessible to people with fewer economic means? Man, I could spend the next 5 hours talking about this subject. It just insists me. And Julie, I'm sure you have some ideas, but there are avenues out there for loaner hearing aids. There are foundations that give away hearing aids. Check with your local, like, I think it's the Lions Club maybe has the one, either Lions or.
Well, Medi-Cal will pay for hearing aid. I mean,
state insurance, but the frustrating thing, depending on your state, is if you're not rich enough to, or if you don't qualify for things like Medi-Cal and your health insurance doesn't,
I know.
sort of a middle-class person kind of gets caught in this horrible zone of not qualifying for state insurance, and it's going to be different in different countries. Also, there's the Starkey Foundation, which does a lot of work on donating hearing aids. So don't give up. There are resources out there. But it is very frustrating. I think it is highway robbery, and I think it's unfathomable.
Well, you say that, but I mean, I worked for a hearing aid company, actually, so I have a couple different perspectives on this.
You're paying for the research, but
well, you're paying for the first one, so the research and development, and then also, you are also actually paying for the care that you receive with the hearing instruments. So you're audiologist, and it's important that's really the important part, because you can take two of the same instruments. One may even cost more than the other from one person to the next, but the person who's programming it for you changes the whole scenario. So
they are the gateway to your brain access.
So it's not that but it's, what can I say? They're expensive, and I wish they weren't too, but I think it starts from the manufacturer down. It starts from the manufacturer. They're expensive. Yeah. And I think if more people, if maybe it's because people aren't addressing it as they should, but then it's like a catch-22. So maybe more people would, they are coming out with over-the-counter hearing instruments. So, but how good are they going to be? Is someone, would Scott do? I don't think so. Like, who's going to really be a candidate for that? Maybe a small minority of people will be okay, but it's. I wish I knew. I wish I knew why it had to, be, and it just keeps getting more expensive. The more connectivity they add on to it, the more everything else, right?
I don't think I could wear hearing aids without having an audiologist to go to. How often do I text you, Julie, or email you about?
Well, yeah. I'm there for people 24/7. Like, anytime. I tell everyone I have no life. I'm happy to help you at any time.
But also, there's like remote programming that can be done with my specific model or in other models. And listen, real talk, like I'm middle class AF, and every time I've had to buy hearing aids, I have to save for a long time. And even my first meeting with Julie last year was, I need new ones. The left one of my old one's not great. It's been in the shop for a few times, and it's just, I need to upgrade. I'm hitting a ceiling on what these hearing aids can do for me, and I really need new ones. My insurance, I have through Kaiser Permanente, through Cover California. This is probably a different experience, maybe for Swan in Canada. I'd be curious, but like I just couldn't get them when I needed them. So I had to wait a few months and I had a really good opportunity at a job, and I saved the money, and I was like, great. And I bit the bullet, and it's
like anything else, right? Yeah. It's a bummer. Like, who wants to spend,
but it's like,
no one wants to wear them. And then who wants to spend all that money on them, right?
But it's also like any medical thing. Like, I think the cost of research and development. The technology is crazy right now, like we all just said, and that comes with a cost. I just wish the insurance companies would cover it and realize how many people are affected by it, especially financially.
Well, right. And sometimes actually insurance companies, oh, it's a whole nother story. This would be a whole nother webinar, but
We'll spin off.
we'll skip that. But
We'll move on.
the
And I
point-
will say some states do mandate health insurance companies to cover hearing aids, but it is a small percentage of states.
but then you got to be careful who you're working with. Okay. I mean, I'm big on that just because it makes such a big difference.
Well, I think Scott brings up a really crucial point, and this is true of all audiology. You can buy the technology, but the gateway to like it working with your brain and accessing your brain is the audiologist. And we're
Right.
going to get into that in a couple sessions or down the line here.
Right.
I want to touch on a really important subject with apologies to all the incredible questions that we got regarding it, but it became really clear to us with regards to tinnitus or tinnitus, depending on where you're from and how you pronounce it, and hyperacusis. It is just a huge topic that affects our industry in a really big way. And so Carrie and I have decided that we are going to do another webinar specifically dedicated to that subject. So Julie's going to give us an overview on it. And if we have time at the very end to dive into some more of those questions, we can. But for now, we're going to shelve it and we're going to dedicate an entire webinar to it. So Julie, tinnitus, hyperacusis, tinnitus.
Tinnitus. I would like to say that. A patient from Germany called it that.
So if you can give us an overview, that would be fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, if people are like, I think I have it, I bet if you have it, you know it. It's a subjective sound that you're hearing. So like, and people hear it all different ways. So like a high pitch, sound, like constant. People typically notice it more in quiet because it's nothing's masking it out. So if you're hearing that, that is tinnitus. The first thing you want to do is have a hearing test, a diagnostic complete hearing test, speak with an otologist. So or ENT, I suppose, if you don't have access to an otologist, but an otologist.
What the difference is between an otologist and an ENT?
ENT is typically called otolaryngologist, but that's ear, nose, and throat. And sometimes ENTs have different specialties. So sometimes they do throat, and you may not know that, right? Because it says ENT, sinuses. But what you want to see, I think, is an otologist. So someone who specializes in just ears. Okay, OTO is ear, and ologist, the study of. So you want to figure out, you want to rule anything out medically, right? That could be causing it, so it could be a pathology of your ear, of your hearing. It could be, because of loud sound exposure. It could be, it could be caused, there's different ways of thinking of this, but some medications certainly cause or exacerbate it. I definitely think there's a link because I've experienced it myself. Anything that affects blood pressure, so caffeine, nicotine, alcohol. It's not to say that if you're having tinnitus, you should not have a drink here and there because that would stress me out. Not to be able to have a cup of coffee for fear that something's going to get worse. It's like everything in moderation. So anyhow, salty foods. And by the way, tinnitus or tinnitus can exist with or without hearing loss, two different things, or together. So, I typically, once we've resolved all the reasons why it could be happening and try to rectify them, if it's loud sound exposure that is exacerbating it, I always recommend custom musicians earplugs or with in-ears, finding the right in-ear monitor for my musicians, being able to wear them at a lower level, wear both ears, get the right mix. And I can go into more detail on that. But if people have it to the point where it's really affecting their day-to-day life and we've done everything that we can, I actually refer people to a cognitive behavioral therapist, Dr. Bruce Hubbard. He's based out of New York, but he does Zoom calls, and he really gives people the tools to manage it. So, and having it manage you, instead of having it manage you, you manage it, right? So it's his website, cbtfortinnitus.com. And I just think he's great. So I feel like, there's all sorts of, acupuncture, this and that. I feel like taking control of it is once you've ruled out any potential cause and done everything you can to prevent it, that's really, I think, the best way to go. There's expensive, expensive equipment like sound therapy devices. I've never delved into that because it doesn't always work. And I like people to be happy. So I just think and convinced, and from patients telling me that, his therapy or, a cognitive behavioral therapist, and it can be done on Zoom, just like this, to manage it is the best route. That's my opinion.
So something called TRT, tinnitus, was it?
Tinnitus retraining therapy. Right, and that's the equipment, sound therapy. I don't, I see people with it, we try to figure it out, but I don't treat it because I'm just not convinced with those mechanisms that that's the best route. So I put it into the court of the person that I think does the best job.
Yeah, I think the important thing with regards to it, and I got some heartbreaking questions about, someone said they've lived with it for, after 40 years of being in the business. Is there anything that can be done? The answer is yes, there are things that can be done. And I think it's important to know that maybe what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for every other person. And we've just linked to the Hearing Health Foundation in the chat, but the Hearing Health Foundation is a phenomenal website for resources specifically on this. If you don't know about the Hearing Health Foundation, you can sign up for their free magazine, and this month is actually dedicated to tinnitus and hyperacusis. This foundation is dedicated to finding a cure for hearing loss and tinnitus, and they've built a consortium of researchers and kind of pooling worldwide resources together. So all these different scientists working on hearing loss around the world are all sort of like united by this foundation. Anyway, their website has some phenomenal resources on tinnitus, and I really encourage you to check it out. And then hopefully look forward to a future webinar where we can get some experts on the subject, and also people that suffer from it. Scott and Swan, we found out today, also have it.
Yeah, actually, just one quick thing I wanted to say. For me, wearing hearing aids has dramatically reduced my tinnitus.
This is something that,
if I take them out, it comes way back up. But when
they're
I wear them,
masking it essentially. Yeah, that can be a benefit of wearing hearing instruments, definitely. It's guaranteed to happen, but a lot of times it does happen.
Question: what is our body telling us after we go see a loud show or we experience something really loud and our ears are ringing? Because I think we all minimize it and say, oh, we just went to a loud show, no big deal. What's our body telling us? Is it a cause for concern? Is it something we ignore, or should we take that as a warning sign?
Certainly you should. It's the cochlea, the hair cells, the teeny tiny millions of frequency coded hair cells, and the hearing nerve, where, if we knew exactly where it was coming from, we'd probably fix it, right? But yeah, your system's being overloaded. And same with temporary threshold shift, temporary hearing loss. After you leave a show, we've all experienced it, I'm sure. You leave and you're like, it's not that you can't hear, it's actually just muffled, right? And that's because typically loud sound affects the higher frequencies from 2500 to 6000 hertz first, from noise exposure or loud sound exposure. So yeah, that's a warning that you've been overexposed. And so that happens, you want to think, if you're going to shows regularly, like anyone working in this industry, the best thing to do is to wear custom earplugs if you're going to be using them often enough, right? So they're going to mimic how the ear canal resonant peak functions, which is a boost at 2500 hertz by about 10 to 15 decibels. And I can, go into more explanation, but essentially the custom plugs are going to soften sound more evenly, taking it down to a more comfortable level, and hopefully prevent that from happening again. So yeah, we don't want ringing of any sort. So whatever you can do, if it happens directly after a loud show, your ear's been overstimulated, simply put, right?
A attendee question: can your ears heal from poor care on tours near loudspeakers? Do ears heal?
Sure. I mean, you can have a temporary threshold shift in hearing. So right after a loud sound exposure, your hearing goes down. This is what I was just referencing. It sounds muffled, and then maybe it comes back up, but maybe it doesn't. And then maybe it also continues to be damaged. If you're on tour, you need earplugs. So if you're around loud, and I think this is a pivotal time, especially with the over a year and a half, of being in mostly quiet environments, to prepare for that again, because I think we're all going to be really sensitive to loud sound once the world is opened back up, right? So the answer to that question is yes, they can, but over time it can damage and get worse too. So
is it safe to do over-the-counter wax removal and ear cleaning?
sure, yeah, you can use Debrox. If you feel like you're really occluded, you should probably visit your audiologist or ear, nose, and throat physician. Urgent care, I would discourage because they don't usually do a very good job. But if you're desperate, okay, it's totally fine to use Debrox. You can even use hydrogen peroxide.
What was the first thing you mentioned?
Debrox, it's over the counter, Debrox. So it's a little oil, it's a little messy. So you just sit with it in your ear for 5 minutes, and then you can use, it comes with like a water lavage. You can get it flushed, you just flush it out yourself, and or you can use hydrogen peroxide and do the same thing, sit for 5 minutes. And
is there a frequency of which, like, you should only do it every so often? Is it okay to do it all the time?
It depends. I mean, no, you don't want to use hydrogen peroxide all the time. Let's just say this. If you feel like it's building up, I would say, how long does it take for that to happen? And beat it to the punch. Like, just don't even have it happen. So it could take some experience, but some people it's once a month. And so for them, I'm like once a week. Just prevent it from, if you only had it done once a year, then I would say every 4 to 6 months do it. So you just want to beat it to the punch of getting to that place.
Great. There was a question, there are elements to this question we'll touch on later, but part of this question was, this is someone that has profound hearing loss in their left ear, starting to lose hearing in the right ear along with tinnitus from a car accident. Starting the brain, is there a hearing aid that cancels out the buzzing sound? We'll get to, that's another subject. Someone mentioned, I recently got hearing aids and it hasn't helped with the buzzing. I'm not sure the right brand. I was told I could get surgery on the left ear, but there's a 1% chance that the surgery wouldn't work. And if it doesn't, I could be left with no hearing in that ear and even louder buzzing. He recommends trying hearing aids first. What are your feelings, thoughts, suggestions about surgery for otosclerosis?
Oh.
Thank you so much. And I had to pose that question because we have 2 people here that have otosclerosis.
Me, I had otosclerosis, or have still, actually, I suppose, right? So I'm totally for it. And if you want to see my testimonial that I did right after I had it, it's on my Instagram page, Musicians Hearing Solutions. So just a few in anyway. It's a video of me talking like a month after I had the surgery. If you have a wonderful otologist who you can talk to their prior patients about the surgery, that's a good way to get a feel for it. If you're in New York, if you're in New York or LA, I have recommendations. If not, I can help you find. But otosclerosis surgery, definitely. I mean, I've seen a lot of outcomes with it because I worked with my surgeon for 5 years. So I had seen people who had it, and then I had it myself. I wouldn't hesitate. And also, you don't want to wait because, as Swan and I were talking about, it could become cochlear otosclerosis, where it affects the inner ear, and then that can't be repaired mechanically, right? So it's like I don't know how to make a good analogy to it, but it's like, it's a mechanical problem. So you can fix your car, right? You can make those changes and fix that. If you're able to do that, like, to me, it's why not? And 1%, it's very rare that something. Yeah, those are good odds. So the person can send me a private message if they want to, and I'm happy to talk about it further.
Cool.
Because that's a very rare thing to have, but.
Yeah. I would like to move into living with hearing loss, where I think Swan and Scott, you're going to have a lot to say on this subject, obviously. Scott, you've already sort of touched earlier on the feeling, what is it like to have hearing loss? But Swan, I'm particularly curious too to hear from you regarding that, because correct me if I'm wrong, you had typical hearing and you've lost your hearing. So can you just sort of talk about what that's like, knowing, what it sounded like before?
Well, yeah. So for me, it was quite progressive, I would say. I started having tinnitus first 10 years ago. And I blamed it on being at shows 5 nights a week for like a whole year, basically. And I was in denial that I was starting to lose my hearing, like completely in denial. I was just like, no, this is this is because of my job, and that's what it is. But I was just noticing that my colleagues were not dealing with what I was dealing with, and that that was a bit scary for me in that reason. And when I finally got diagnosed and I was wearing hearing aids, for me it was like very hard to adjust at first. It was like I knew what sound was supposed to be like when I was at a concert, and before I started wearing hearing aids, I started to struggle quite a bit with quieter acoustic shows where my tinnitus was so loud that sometimes I wouldn't hear detail on an acoustic guitar or on a quiet vocal or something. And that was very distressing. And then when I started wearing hearing aids, I remember like the first couple of years of doing that, I would always like take one out, take two out, put one back in. The whole show I was just trying to figure out how things were supposed to sound and how they sounded when I had my hearing aids in. Because sometimes I would hear like so much distortion coming from my hearing aids because they were not programmed to handle louder sounds, and the dynamics were all wrong. So that it took a while for me to adjust and work with my audiologist to come up with the correct programming. So what I was hearing was what I knew what it was supposed to sound like.
I think trusting yourself maybe is like a barrier to overcome, right?
Oh yeah, oh for sure. Like I was second guessing myself for so long, and kind of like not relying on other people to tell me it sounded okay, but it was like finding that balance of, I could tell if my mix was balanced, because it's something I felt more than I actually heard. But then I was like, am I hearing what other people are hearing? Am I focusing on the things that people care about? So that was a big learning curve for me. And I think I just started being more and more confident in what my hearing aids were allowing me to do. And I think I know exactly what I'm hearing, and people seem to enjoy my mixes. So, but yeah, it was hard too because of the stigma. I didn't tell anybody that I was wearing hearing aids, so I couldn't.
Right, which can be really stressful, right? It can be stressful. It can
so stressful.
lead to depression. It can also, it affects your whole body, right?
My self-confidence was completely plummeted at first. You're like, always wondering, are people hearing what I'm hearing? And it was very, very struggling.
Swan, what made you decide to do that article and sort of go public with your hearing loss?
I think like the main thing for me was to just get rid of that weight of my shoulders and come clean. That's not really I had nothing to hide really, but it was always living with that stress that being like, oh my god, people are going to find out, they're going to second guess my mixes, they're going to not hire me or something. And obviously like when COVID started and we're all out of work, it gave me more time to think about it and about the grief surrounding my hearing loss and the acceptance of it as well. And I think what really pushed me to go public about it was I didn't know any other sound technicians who wore hearing aids at work. And I was like, I know there are people who struggle with hearing loss, musicians, sound technicians, anybody who works in our industry. And if I could just show some people that they're not alone, I think that was the main thing for me.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think the
And
more you
yeah,
talk about it, it's like people aren't afraid to, put the glasses on, right? Or say, I
yeah,
can't see something. So it's really the same thing.
it
Uh,
is. It really is. Yeah.
truly, truly is. And I think the more people that understand that, the
Mhm.
better it'll
The
help
better
them.
for
Because you
everybody.
don't want, yeah, I mean, because the long-term effects are that, you don't stimulate the hearing nerve. It can lead to,
Dementia and all
dementia
that.
and right. And also the consequences that you don't even realize, the frustration, the depression, anything else. So
Yeah, the isolation
it's
as well.
very prevalent.
Mhm.
I fit a lot of people, so it's more prevalent than you know. I
Yeah.
was excited when Scott wanted to talk about it, and yeah, I mean, I wish more people would, so that people would be more comfortable with it,
Mhm.
knowing that you can do a lot of things and it's not a career ender.
No, it's not.
Just a comment, just like I can't see, I have to put the contacts in and out the glasses on to see better. So that's what you do,
Mhm.
right? It's just simple. That's it.
Yeah, totally agree with that.
What's the reaction been since that article came out? What kind of feedback have you gotten from people?
It was pretty incredible. I got so much support from local musicians that I worked with. And I received lots of messages from sound technicians and musicians from all over the world. They contacted me directly, just share their story with me, and ask for advice. Of course, I don't have much advice to give except from my own perspective and experience. But that it justified my choice of writing that article. Is seeing the response that I got from it.
Well,
And that people were just like, I'm so happy that you wrote this. Like I felt so alone in this, and I don't know if I can keep working in my studio or as a musician or something. So yeah, there was this conversation starting that was really very good, I think.
Well, I for one, and I think everyone here would thank you for doing it, because you're not alone, and it takes people like you being brave enough to talk about it, like you and Scott, and hopefully other people will feel more comfortable to have the conversation, because we can all learn from each other. What works for Scott might not work for Swan, and vice versa. And so learning not only about the technology that's available that can be used in our industry, but also how, and we're going to get into this in a little bit, but how do you support the musicians that you're working with effectively who may or may not, who may have hearing loss? Scott, what about you? Is it something you talk about? Is it something people know about? Or do you try to keep it on the DL? What's your experience been like?
It's a mixed bag. I mean, to be 100% honest, I talk about it very openly on my social media. I have all of my friends know I wear hearing aids. It's no secret. But I do hit some kind of, Julie and I were texting today, like I would probably get a little more benefit from having behind the ear hearing aids, and something in me is just not ready to have something that noticeable. And as long as I don't like need it, I'm going to take advantage of having a lower profile hearing aid. And I don't know what that hang up is. But in general, talking about my hearing loss and explaining it to people has been like, I mean, first of all, so many people will reply to me like, oh, my mom or my dad like definitely needs a hearing aid and they will not get one, or my brother needs, whatever. So helping people talk to family members about hearing loss. And it has been one byproduct of me talking about it openly. And I think, and one thing I wanted to say earlier is like, it's crazy how fast the technology is moving, but people's perceptions and the stigma of wearing a hearing aid is still the same as it's been for 40 years. It's like people think that I don't know what people think a hearing aid is, it's like the technology is insane. And I was even laughing this week, a friend of mine was just walking around with AirPods in her ears like 24/7. I was like, but a hearing aid, a lot of them are smaller or less noticeable than an AirPod, and you have no trouble walking around with those hanging out of your ears all day. So it's like, it's interesting, like how the stigma and people have some hurdles to get over, including myself, and I've lived with it my whole life. I can't imagine going through what Swan went through, because I mean, like, I have my own emotional issues with my hearing loss, but having a sudden loss or a gradual loss over a short amount of time, like I can't imagine, because I was just born, like, I don't know, I've never heard it differently. I have witnessed like changes in my hearing which give me anxiety and freak me out. And I mean, my greatest fear ever is like that I'm going to be without hearing someday, because my hearing has I'm not going to be, but my hearing has changed and especially playing live music when I was in bands and standing next to the crash cymbal or next to the electric guitar, I've definitely further damaged my hearing. And being in the studio, I've jacked up my headphones too loud at times. And it's just, I've definitely damaged my hearing in addition to what I was born with. But as far as like, yeah, I mean, living with it, and people around me, like, I don't know, I don't have a problem like talking about it. And if anyone wants to message me directly that's watching, or feel free, I'd be happy to talk about it. If there's like something specific about playing and singing, my biggest hurdle in my job is not playing, because often I'll take my hearing aids out and put in in-ear monitors and they're amazing. But my biggest hurdle in my job is when I'm in a big rehearsal space and the singer is in a microphone, I can hear them, but then the people next to the singer are saying, hey, let's try that in F sharp. And I have no idea what they said because they're so far away, even when I'm wearing my hearing aids. Then I can jack my hearing aids up, but then everything is so loud. So that's my biggest hurdle, even with technology, even though the new hearing aids are better at that. But that's my daily kind of thing.
Distance and noise.
Distance and noise.
Root
Yeah.
of all evil. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Do I have a solution for that though, Scott? I have a solution.
Okay.
I mean, should I just mention it? I'm just going to mention it. Sensophonics and ASI, the 3D Me in-ear monitor, ear level active microphones. You control the volume. You create the sound quality each ear individually.
Wow.
You can demo it in my office. So that, and then you can piggyback into a mix, and then you can go full ambient. Oh yeah, I think I wanted you to try it. So Swan, I'll tell anyone about it too, but it's super cool. It's like an electronic earplug, so you can dial down the ambient mics, right?
Wow.
All the way off, or there's an app for it. There's an app for it too. ASI audio, and then again piggyback into a mix, so you have the room and the mix.
Oh,
yeah, that's what I was going to tell you about.
That's wild.
Anyway,
right.
we can talk more about product recommendations. That's probably a whole nother webinar, but
Yeah.
something you should try. You can take it home for the weekend or however long. Okay.
So piggyback off of one thing Swan said real quick when she said, trusting yourself and what you hear. I mean, I've kind of learned what things sound like with my hearing. So I don't, I may not hear the hi-hat in my mix as much as I want to hear it, unless I like jack my headphones up, which I don't want to do. But I kind of know where it's supposed to go based on my hearing. So I don't know really how to explain that to someone that doesn't work in music or that kind of like audio world. But it just, I don't know. I kind of know. I mean, I if I'm producing or songwriting, I put it on my iPhone speaker. I hold it right at my ear. I'm like, that kick drum doesn't sound right. But I just know what it does sound right with my hearing. And then I'll put it on my headphones. I'll put it on my AirPods. I'll go in my car with my hearing aids out, with my hearing aids in. It's just like I kind of have a sense of what it should feel like. And also a lot of it is like subjective. So like what I do might end up being a good thing that someone else might not have done that has normal hearing, because the way I don't know what the byproduct of my disability is actually. It might be a plus. I know when I'm writing lyrics, I could mishear someone and then all of a sudden I have a better lyric idea because I misheard what they just said, so that helps a lot too.
So we were talking before we went live with Scott and Swan, and Scott, you were saying a lot of times you'll take your hearing aids in and out depending on the task, whereas Swan, your hearing loss has progressed to the point where you really don't have that option. So do you both work in your hearing aids? Are there limitations when you do have your aids in that you thought, God, if I didn't have these? It sounds like Julie has some incredible there's technology out there maybe, but if you could comment on that.
Let me just say something too. I mean, Swan's a front of house engineer, right? So
good point.
Yeah, she's going to do, but so for Scott, he's a musician. So hearing the intricacies through really good quality headphones are always going to trump, and I hate to say that word, but are always going to be better than the hearing aids with music. Okay, now, sorry, back to you. But Scott, explaining when you're using them and when you're not, you're picking and choosing.
Yeah, I pick and choose. I mean, you know, if this year's been different, you know, I don't know. This year's been different because I'm sitting in my apartment a lot. So if I'm in my apartment, you know, I use them to watch TV. I put my Apple TV right to my hearing aids a lot. I use them to listen to podcasts, and I can walk around my apartment and leave my phone in the other room, and I'm just in my hearing aids. So I'm sure, you know, I live alone. So if I live with someone, they'd probably think I was nuts. But I mean, it works great for me. For work, I tend to just, and Julia, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but like, because my hearing aids, like, they're attenuated, right? I mean, they're adjusting what I'm hearing, right? They're not like flat hearing. Like, I feel like these are flat. Like, I know what things sound like in this headphone, but if I put my hearing aids on, I don't necessarily like to mix or work or produce in my hearing aids. I'm just hearing, maybe I'm just not used to hearing it. You know, I'm just hearing too much. I don't know. I just know what things sound like in headphones. So I choose to work in headphones. I'm not wearing my hearing aids now for this thing because I can hear clearly with my headphones on.
Yeah. It's, first of all, whatever you're comfortable with is fine. But no, your hearing aids aren't attenuating. That would be an earplug. I mean, your hearing aids are amplifying. So, but also, you know, we can get in and I mean, look, if you're doing great, then why fix it if it's not broken?
Right.
You're not having any problems. And if you're comfortable that way, but if you wanted to, you can actually, you know, go in and design a music program and that remote. So there's remote programming. So you can be in Paris and I can be here, and we can do remote programming in your environment through the hearing instruments, through the computer, to get it exactly right. And I've done that with people, studio engineers, you know, making these tweaks and changes so that they can use it. As long as you're not wearing the headphones too loud, I'm okay with it. Because that would be my only concern, is that, you know, you not only have to think about how you're hearing it, but also how loud you're hearing it and for how long, because we don't want to do further damage.
Right.
I didn't even touch base about that yet, which is really important, but you see what I'm saying?
We're going to get to that.
Okay.
What about you, Swan?
So yeah, for me, I wear them, you know, first thing I do in the morning, I put them in and I take them out when I'm going to bed. Well, yeah, same thing. Like, this year has been very different. I've been home a lot, but I live with my partner who has hyperacusis. Pardon me.
Can you explain what hyperacusis is real quick?
So for her, like, every sound, every noise is extremely loud and painful. And for me, I can't hear anything.
I can't hear you all, ironically. I'm not sure if there's there's a delay.
So yeah, my partner suffers from hyperacusis, so we have to be in a quiet environment all the time, so she doesn't get pain from noises and stuff. So our communication, you know, is a bit difficult because if she talks quietly, because she can't talk loud, because otherwise it's too loud for her, then I can't hear her. So I'm often adjusting my hearing aids, you know, when we're trying to communicate. But when I was at work, when I was still working, as I was saying, it took me a while to be at a place where I would just keep them in all the time and know that, you know, I was hearing what I was supposed to hear. A lot of time I would just turn them down a couple notches to avoid ear fatigue, because it's still like they amplify sound quite a lot. So it's just like, well, you know, after 5 hours of concert, it can be quite a lot for sure. But just wear them all the time. If I anytime I had to use over the ear headphones, like in a live setting, you know, when I solo something and just to check a specific channel or something, I would have to crank the headphones like to the highest volume possible, and I kind of position them so they would hit the microphone of my hearing aid, but that would also create feedback within the can itself. So that was frustrating for me. Like, I cannot listen to music on headphones while wearing my hearing aids. Because that just creates feedback and it just sounds thin. So now I just listen to music straight to my hearing aids.
Real quick, Julie, typically hearing aids go out to what frequency? 6,000.
6,000.
Very high.
Well, no, that's not very high.
No, that's
And in the music world, that's not high at all, actually. So, that's really the cutoff for speech, right? And then some of them have extensions for their music program where it's a little bit more broad. No, so that's actually anyone in music or in audio or sound engineering, that's not a high frequency, right? That would be considered more mid, but in speech, it's considered high.
Right.
Right?
Scott,
Am I right, guys?
yeah. Scott and Swan, Swan, I know this is all relatively recent for you, but in your opinion, do you feel like your hearing loss has cost you any job opportunities?
No. There's just one job that I got approached for right before the pandemic started, and it was to be a monitor engineer on a A-list artist 6 months tour, and that was the first time where I was like, I do not know if I can do this
Because it was monitor position as
because it was monitors instead of front of house.
Well,
And
we-
I mix monitors most of the time when I do front of house. I work in smaller venues, and I've never had an issue doing monitors like that. But I was worried that I wouldn't be able to go back and forth between listening to an in-ear mix in in-ears and
Talking to
obviously
people.
not hearing anything else. Yep.
3D me.
Mhm.
3D me.
3D.
Is that what you were talking about
The
earlier?
product I was just talking with the three.
So
with
there are
Conductive.
solutions out there, people.
There are solutions. You just have to, you have to have the right resources to find them.
Yeah, and that's something, and then everything got canceled anyway. But that was the one time I wasn't sure I could do it, or I didn't know how to do it.
I've never felt like I've missed out on a job because of my hearing, but it's definitely made work trickier, and I've had to find ways to, but I feel like, and I imagine this is the case of Swan, like, this sounds cheesy, but it's really true. Like as a musician, I don't really have a choice. Like, I am a musician. Like, this is what I do. This is what I love to do. It's my passion. So as cheesy as that sounds, that just kind of outweighs any kind of hurdle. It's just like, I'm going to get through it. I'm going to do it. And I'm going to be as good or better than anyone else that does it because I have to. It's just like, that's my life and that's where my heart is. So it's like,
Absolutely.
other people's perception of it, like why they would, I can't imagine being a songwriter and like someone, I just had a writing session this week with someone who's deaf. She can hear, she has a minimal hearing, but it was like her and I in a session, and we were making jokes about like how the producer's going to have to, relay what we're saying to each other. But I don't think a lot of times it's made work trickier for sure, especially like I said, if I'm trying to hear conversations about what we're changing the key and I missed that conversation and then I mess up and that's embarrassing. But often I've found it to be a plus, and I've found it to be like sometimes puts me at an advantage to have to try harder, or I hear things differently, or I'm paying closer attention. There are different positive byproducts of having hearing loss too.
Also, circling back to, we touched on it a little bit earlier, there is technology out there that improves access to sort of group situations. There are microphones that you can literally hold and point at people that will interface with your hearing aids. There are devices you can put in the middle of a table that pick up, all the voices surrounding the table.
You can turn your iPhone into it, or your phone into a microphone also.
Yeah, so there's, and I just hope that, like, like this webinar, plants the seedlings of building a community so that we can share these kinds of resources, so that when people are trying to figure this out for themselves, we can pool, the greater knowledge as a community, because it's such a niche market with such specific needs, which is what makes Julie so special. Because when we get into this next section about, audiologists, how do you find a good audiologist? They're not all created equal. And so in terms of understanding our unique specific needs. I have one question. I don't want to dive too heavy into this, but someone said, does anyone have any thoughts on a path to pivoting from sound work to hearing healthcare careers? Julie, do you have any insights on that?
You can text me, they can message me privately, but it's just such a different animal. What I do, my practice, I actually get contacted a lot by audiologists, and they want to have this music niche. And I was like, well, the thing is I didn't plan it. It kind of happened naturally. for me. And it's not like you can they're not going to just let any audiologist work within your monitors, right? So it's not really a viable. I mean, look, anything can happen. I'm not saying, it's just that I would say you should make sure you really like audiology as it is, and understand it, and maybe shadow people if you can do that. Yeah, but if the person wants to message me, I'm happy to explain it more. Right. Or anyone. Yeah.
I want to move on to hearing health and hearing loss prevention. Let's start by Julie talking about in-ear monitors and the ability to tune towards a individual hearing loss if you are a monitor engineer potentially, or an artist. If you want to start that.
Yeah, well, I mean, the whole point of custom in-ear monitors is, they were I'll start with that. So, to replace the wedges on stage so that people could hear more precisely, or even just hear what they needed to hear to perform live, right? Without competing with outside noise. You can still wear in-ear monitors too loud and cause hearing loss. So people need to know that just because you're wearing them, they are not hearing protective devices at all, unless you use them properly. They set you up to do that, but you're ultimately in control of the volume. If you do have any issues with your hearing, so JH Audio will actually tune monitors to hearing test results. So that from the get-go, you're not having to accommodate with your console mix or your volume. It's already there, right, from the beginning. The amplification of whatever frequency you need. So, you have to think about, even if you have hearing loss already, you want to conserve it, right? So, and the way to do that is to monitor your volume levels. It's all about how loud and how long. So anything you can do to keep the volume level at a comfortable lower pace with the right mix, comfortable lower level. Did I say pace? With the right mix coupled together is better for the long haul. Also, that Sensophonics 3D Me product that I was speaking of with the active ear level microphones, it actually has DSP. So it allows you to actually tune the sound quality of the monitors as well as the ambient to your needs. So that's a way you can act. And I think probably what we're going to see is companies moving into that more and more, but it's not quite there. But that Sensophonics product does have that. And it's right now it's just, universal fit. So you can get a custom sleeve for it, but that will help you to hear. For a musician, it helps them to, again, hopefully be able to wear the volume levels lower and not ask for more highs, right? So the monitor engineer isn't having to push the console mix more than they want to. It starts you at a good place if you have the right in-ear monitors, the right seal, and the right sound quality to your needs. Every company sounds different. Being able to demo them and having the actual artist demo them is key. I mean, that's from my perspective, because I work with, a lot of the top companies and we demo to find the right product. If you as a musician or a sound engineer, you feel good about that choice, not just by what someone else tells you, I think that sets you up for success, because it's a really important tool for the show.
Someone in the chat, Sound Girl, said Stealth Sonics does this as well. I don't know if that means.
I think Carrie, you told me that. I didn't know that. I'm hearing a swishing. Anyone else? Okay. Okay, Stealth Sonics does that too. I didn't know that, but I don't have their, I'm not a dealer. I'm like a doctor dealer for their products, but good. That's good to know. I think it's great. I wish they all did that, but
we need more technology.
Like I said, I think DSP implemented into the in-ears is probably the way of the future, right? So you can turn one set of earphone monitors into more warm, yourself. You can make those changes yourself.
Can you do that with an app or?
Yeah, well, the Sensophonics you can, but I'm saying I think more companies will move into that as we progress. I've heard talk of it, so we're just waiting for it. But for now, Sensophonics with the app, and then JH Audio and Stealth Sonics will take your hearing test results and tune the monitors, the custom monitors to them.
That's cool.
got a lot of questions about earplugs. So I want you to touch on the difference between an over-the-counter pair of earplugs versus custom. Maybe not everyone can afford custom. Maybe you're a lighting person that just doesn't want to spend money on a custom set of plugs. I got on Wirecutter recently to read up on, like, you know, over-the-counter earplugs, and there were some really great recommendations. So Julie, if you can just touch on the difference, the benefits of custom versus over the counter, and what are some of the other
I
questions?
participated in that article, actually. I don't know if you
The
saw that.
Wirecutter one?
Yeah,
I have links to some of the recommendations.
it's all on my website too, but that Wirecutter, I participated in that. It was like 2 years ago. But yeah, so over the counter, first of all, they have to fit right. Foam tends to not fit great. You have to, you know, first of all, the over the counters are going to muffle the sound. If you're a sound engineer, if you're a musician, if you're in these going to be in these loud environments, you're probably not going to like the sound quality on these over the counter, right? What happens is everybody's ear canal has a resonant peak right around 2,500 hertz. Okay, so 2,500 hertz gets an extra 10 to 15 decibel boost over all the other frequencies because of how your ear canal is shaped. So when you put an over-the-counter plug into your ear, you are definitely softening sound if it fits, but you're muffling it. So typically these are rejected, right? By people who are musicians and sound engineers. I think the best over-the-counter plug, if you need that, is made by Automatic Research, the Eddy plug. It's shaped like a Christmas tree, and it's a lot easier to get in to seal, and takes away about 12 decibels, right? The only thing is it's got a little stick sticking out of it, but you can really twist it in. You twist it in instead of like the foam. It's too much. It's usually, you know, if you get it in properly, it's just too much and it's too muffled. So the Eddy plugs, I think, sound the best. I've tried eargasms. They sound pretty good too. But again, it's all about the fit. So if you have a teeny tiny ear canal and it's super windy, which you may not even know, if you can't get the fit right, then there's no point. But the reason why custom plugs are better, first of all, they're generally, I mean, for me, they're $250. And if you're going to use them a lot, then it's worth it. If you can divide that by the amount of shows and whatever else, I'm sure you can justify that. But the custom plugs are made of a soft silicone. I take impressions of your ear, and they have a filter in them that's specifically designed to recreate your ear canal resonant peak. So that boosts at 2,500 hertz, and you can either reduce by 9 decibels, 15, or 25. 15 is the most even. 9 I describe as taking the edge off. Typically for vocalists, I'll recommend that because you don't want to take too much away, right? Then you won't be able to hear yourself, and then you cause vocal issues. So 15 is the more even. Every 3 decibels we reduce doubles the perception, right? So it really depends on what you're doing. And then 25 is pretty aggressive, and that is going to take down some more of the highs. But sometimes people just tell me they're in this metal band, they're in a garage rehearsing, they want 25s, and that's fine too. But as far as, you're hearing now, I don't know if you asked me this, but that's basically the difference between over the counter and custom. So there's a couple different filters that are available in custom plugs. I personally prefer Automatic Research filters. Tried and true. They have all the research behind them showing that recreation of the ear canal resonant peak and then reducing. There's other ones that are smaller. I just haven't had as much good fortune with those. So I prefer Sensophonics to make the ear plug, and then they use Automatic Research filters for the custom part. And then you can also actually get a solid filter if you just want to have an option for reducing everything. And for those people on tour, you can get custom sleeping plugs, which are great. Comfy, shutting down sound, giving you peace and quiet. Does that answer that?
Yeah, and I think I'm going to try to find a way to build some links, because people are asking about links to some of the custom manufacturers as well as the over-the-counter. So
Automatic Research, Eddy plug, and then sensophonics.com. If you can look on their website for audiologists.
What we'll do, everyone, is this chat will be available on YouTube, and we will add links and compile those links and put it in the comments of the YouTube channel. Yeah, we talked about that. Audiologists, how do you find a good audiologist? What do you look for? And what is the sort of standard battery of tests you should ask for from your audiologist?
So how do you find a good audiologist? Well,
if I had, I wish I knew the answer. It's hard. It's
well, yeah, I don't know, maybe Scott Swan can tell you, but you know, audiologists aren't, I mean, nor really should they, unless they have a niche like I do. You know, they're not sound engineers, they're not musicians, but you know, hopefully you can find someone who has an understanding of your environments. I personally think that seeing a private practice audiologist and the owner of that private practice is the way to go, because they have a vested interest in your happiness. It's because if it's their business, it's their thing. And also experience. How long have they been doing it? Look at Google reviews, Yelp reviews, Facebook reviews, just reviews of other people's experiences with that person. And if you see all those things line up, you know, then that could be your person. So that's my advice. Not to say that people who are in audiologists in hospitals or other environments aren't great. But I think reviews are a good way. I don't know. What do you guys think, Scott and Swan? Like,
well, for me, I found my audiologist, you know, because she was close to my doctor, and she was like, "Oh, you should go get, you know, hearing tests." And so actually, you know, the first one I saw, I remember I didn't feel comfortable around him.
Yeah, you just have to.
Yeah, you know, it's like the feel, just like, oh, he's trying to push hearing aids on me, like, and like I was just getting their hearing test done, and then actually, yeah, I picked a clinic that was owned by women. That was my choice, and I got lucky. Like my audiologist, that we developed a very good relationship, and she understood what I was doing. She went to concerts a lot as well, and we kind of spoke the same language too. You know, like
right.
She was happy that I understood frequencies, for example, and we just developed a good relationship that way.
I found that I was frustrated with my former audiologist because I was talking more specifically about certain things in music and mentioning frequencies, and we were just like on different. She was more technical with like the audiology side, and I was trying to say how it was affecting me musically, and we just didn't communicate. But they got me through. I mean, luckily, I'm not just saying that because Julie's on this chat, but because luckily I found her, and so it's not easy to find someone that understands musicians and understands music. And so when I found her, and I found Julie because Logitech requested her or suggested her when I was looking for earplugs fitting. So I just went in for a fitting and we just hit it off. I also recommend finding an audiologist with a super cute dog they bring to the office occasionally. I think that helps.
I have my dog at the office a lot, but he's not here right now. He's at the neighbor's, Cooper. Yes, that does help. Therapy dog. But too, you know, to find someone who maybe knows more about musicians' needs, you know, reference the in-ear monitor company's websites. So Sensophonics, and then they have golden circles near people who have been trained with musicians' needs. You know, looking to JH Audio, like use those resources too, because they're going to know. The people at those in-ear monitor companies are going to know the audiologists and know their specialties to know, you know, to be able to refer you. Hopefully that could be a resource.
And I think it helps when, like we were saying earlier, the more that like people like Swan and I talk about it, because we have to see our audiologist probably more so than people with normal hearing do. But like, you know, I've referred musician friends to Julie here in LA just because that may be going through something temporary, you know, something not as like massive as a hearing loss. But I was like, here's someone that's like knows what language musicians are speaking. So sometimes just asking musician friends that, you know, have hearing loss and are treating it.
Yeah, I think it's important too that where they understand that we don't go to see the audiologist just so we can understand speech better. Yeah. Like take the focus off of speech. You know, obviously it's very important, but music is you know, such a big aspect of what we're looking for.
Yeah. And if you can find someone who does test out to 20,000 hertz. That's always great. You're going to be hard pressed to find that. But
Mhm.
I actually had someone from New Zealand contact me asking me if I could refer someone there. And I just said, you know what, that came up with the idea of asking the company that makes my equipment who they've sold it to. So I use a Madsen Otometrics. And then maybe that equipment company will know who has that equipment if their practice isn't like mine, specifically geared towards musicians, right? So maybe that's a way to find someone who does that. I find it really telling. I don't know why it's not a standard to test the whole range of hearing. I really don't. I can't answer that, but it's not. But yeah, sound quality and hearing are two different things.
Right.
So you want to find someone who, and it's unfortunately it's not as common, but it's just two different things. So I would use the music industry resources, those companies, to see who.
I think it's important, and this is a question, how often do you get your hearing tested? Like, if you're not suffering from hearing loss, you're not going to have to go potentially as frequently. So if you're on tour,
Not necessarily true.
well, I want you to answer that question, but if you are in a position where you're traveling, you could potentially coordinate with a resource that might not be in your town,
right,
that you could see while you're traveling. And if you're not having to go as frequently, maybe it's worth it, So that is the next question. How often should you get your hearing tested? Should you get your hearing tested even if you think your hearing's fine? And why is that important?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a musician or an audio engineer, I mean, I've done talks to AES, and my first question is, how many of you have had your hearing tested in the last 5 years? And like 10 people raise their hand out of 80, and how many of you are audio engineers? Everyone raise your hand. I mean, you want to check your hearing health. So you definitely want a baseline. And then from there, if you are exposed, if you are in environments that are louder, you want to check it annually, because noise-induced hearing loss is sneaky, typically affecting the higher frequencies from about 2,500 hertz, 3,000 hertz to 6,000 hertz first. And if it's a mild notch, you don't really notice it. But if it's there, if that configuration is on your hearing test, you want to be aware of it. And then you want to be on a good hearing conservation plan, which includes monitoring your loudness levels, wearing hearing protection when you can't control the volume, and then annually monitoring it, because you want to make sure, even if you have a little notch that you don't notice in your day-to-day, which you won't if it's mild, right? But you will if it gets any deeper than that, and then it's too late, right? So the only way to know is with a discrete hearing test. And you want to be sure, ask your audiologist that they test 3,000 hertz and 6,000 hertz. So typically an audiologist will test 250, 500, 1,000, 2, 4, and 8. But you also want them to test 3,000 and 6,000, because that's where loud sound exposure can affect it. So if there's not a 10 dB gap between those 2 and 4, they typically won't test 3, but you want them to test 3. You want to have the full picture, discrete frequency testing. And then of course, ideally you test out to 20, but minimally make sure you ask for that.
And, in terms of the baseline, I think that's really important. I always equate it when I'm talking to people in the business, like think of it like your annual, as an extension of your annual physical. You work in a high risk environment. It's something you should want to track.
So it's never too late.
Exactly.
I mean, it might be if you have hearing, but then you still want to conserve what you have, right? So, and that's the only way to know. And don't be scared of it. I mean, I have a vocal booth. I have a whisper room in my office so that people are comfortable getting in it. They feel at home in it. And it, kind of is what it is. So it's better to know than not to know.
Someone asked if they could go to, some of those low cost, like free hearing screening clinics. Can you speak to the difference between maybe like a hearing screening versus a full hearing test?
Yeah, a hearing screening, sometimes they just set the threshold at 25 and see if you pass across the board. They may not find your exact threshold at each frequency. You get what you pay for, isn't that the saying? If this is your career and this is what you're doing, you need to have a discrete, complete diagnostic hearing evaluation, which also typically includes tympanometry, which is the test that tests your middle ear, and acoustic reflexes. And you just want to have a full, complete baseline. You want a discrete test. What's your threshold at each frequency? So, I mean, is it better than nothing? Yeah. And your internist, maybe they'll do some sort of a rudimentary test, but you want to see an audiologist.
If I suspect I'm developing hearing loss, should I quit close monitoring or something that requires precise monitoring like mastering? How long would you advise, for how long do you advise wearing headphones, especially someone with a close monitoring job like a location recordist?
So you can, well, first of all, it's all about keeping your hearing safe from loud sound exposure. Is all about how loud your environment is and for how long you're there. Whether you're wearing in-ears or it's coming from a speaker, it's how loud, how long. So with speakers, you can do a sound level measurement. And if that's your occupation, I suggest you get one, a sound level meter, measure in dBA, and see how loud your speakers are. And then you can use the Niosh scale for safety.
Let me give you a little.
Yeah, so there's two scales for safety, Osha and Niosh. Osha is for factory workers and Niosh is more conservative. So that's what I use. And should I wait so you cue it up or?
Sorry, I'm trying my
So it doesn't matter if it's here or here. And then if it's here, you know, the longer you're listening, the lower the volume should be. If you're finding you have to crank it up, then you need to reevaluate what kind of earphones you're using. So 85 decibels is safe for 8 hours. And every time you increase that by 3 decibels, you cut the safe listening time in half. So 85 for 8, 88 for 4, 91 for 2, 94 for 1, 97 for a half an hour, 100 dB for 15 minutes. So if you start out knowing where that's the only way you're going to know, because loudness is a perception. People come in all the time and say it's loud. But what I think is loud and what you think is loud could be two different things, right? So the only way you know is to do a sound level check. And, you know, Scott, since we were talking about AirPods earlier, there's even in the health app of your iPhone, if you are using AirPods, you can go to the hearing section and it'll tell you how loud you're wearing your earphones. So you have an idea. You can do a real ear measurement through your audiologist to see where you're wearing your headphones as well. But the general rule, you know, someone going to go through all that, maybe if you're an engineer and you're real critical, but the longer you're wearing it, it doesn't matter if it's actually custom in-ears the better the seal in the ear canal, the less you're competing with outside noise and the lower you can wear the volume. It doesn't matter that they're in your ear canal. It's all about how loud you're wearing them and for how long.
And I think it's important to note, it's in the chat, live engineers, monitor engineers should be keeping track of stage volume overall for each musician over the course of a tour. So your accurate records of what is happening over long periods and be able to relay this information to your artists. And if you're on tour, you could, you know, obviously get your sound company or production to buy a proper SPL meter, but for your own use, you can buy an SPL meter for less than $10 for your iPhone and
wow.
get like a general idea, right?
A real one is like $20 to $50. I used to say get the Radio Shack one, but you know, that's out of business. I think you can still get them, but you know, if that's what you're doing, and especially front of house, you're responsible for the hearing at everyone in the show. You know, you want to keep, and I understand that managers will say turn it up and you can't always, you know, I get it. I've sat there and watched it happen, but you know, for your artists too, I actually have one monitor engineer that insists the artists that he works with at a really high level get their hearing tested so that he can see what's going on and that he can make sure he's doing the right things for them. I mean, maybe they'd be resistant, but it's like, it's really the smart thing to do, right? Since you're going to be responsible, and then also making sure they're not wearing it too loud on their pack. So.
A great question here. Do you believe that the percentage of deafness and rapid hearing loss will increase with the current and younger generations as consumer products such as earbuds keep getting louder and louder, especially with an increase in demand and emphasis for louder and deeper low frequency reproduction?
Well, it doesn't matter what the sound is, if it's low frequency or high frequency, it's all about the loudness. So yeah, if people are going to wear earphones loud, there's going to be a higher probability that they're going to cause themselves noise-induced hearing loss. So yeah, I do think so. So, and actually, you know, the iPods, I don't think they sound good, but I'm also in a position with, you know, really discreet opinion people working in this, you know, hi-fi audio segment. But the better quality your earphone is, the less you're going to have to drive it. And so it's really not about how loud they get, it's how loud you turn them. So you can drive a Ferrari 150, but it doesn't mean you should.
Exactly.
Right.
Another question, and I don't think this is probably we'll shelve this, but I think it's on people's minds. How, you know, we've talked a lot about it. How do I prevent hearing loss in my career? We've spent a lot of time on that. And what are my options if I'm unable to work due to hearing loss down the road? That is
no, that's not gonna happen, because there's so many things you can do. So I know there's been articles of high-level musicians saying that they can't perform because of their hearing loss. Well, I need to get a hold of them because we can fix that. So don't have that attitude, but you do want to be, you know, whatever you can do to prevent hearing loss due to sound exposure. And there's lots of other causes of hearing loss. And I hope we've made that clear, that it's not just sound exposure, loud sound exposure, but there's always something you can do to fix that. So it's not going to be a career ender. Okay. It's just not. And ignore what you saw in Sound of Metal, because that's not reality. That's not something that, that's not how it goes, first of all. I mean, I say that only because I have people coming in my office, grown men, like basically like, I'm going to be like Sound of Metal. Like they're scared of it. And I'm glad that it brings awareness to it, but that's not going to happen like that. So there's a way, there's ways, there's tools, there's so many tools to accommodate. So
this came up in a question on the Facebook Live feed. Only ear lens. Have you heard of that? Do we have
like a middle ear surgery?
Yes, oh no, they asked. It said only ear lens uses a small lens placed directly on the eardrum to vibrate and activate your natural hearing process. By sending sound information directly to the eardrum without a speaker, you get more complete sound than any other hearing device on the market. It sounds like from their sales.
It doesn't sound like that. I think it would be totally, I don't have any experience with it, but I
don't either. So I don't think
that person's going to be a candidate, whoever's a candidate for that's going to be very specific. So I don't know. There's a lot of new things.
If we don't, we probably shouldn't speak to it if we don't know anything about it. This is an interesting question that I think is pretty relevant given our last year. How do you think these months, years of sitting at home using headphones will change both of our perception and expectations for live sound once we were back in venues?
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I think people are going to be really sensitive to loud sounds after this pandemic. Don't you think?
What do you guys think, Scott and Swan?
I think Swan's probably a better expert on this.
Yeah, I think like, not, you know, people who go regularly to live shows and not going for maybe like a year and a half, 2 years, I think it's going to be very gradual to be able to go back in that environment and feel comfortable.
Yeah, I've seen something. Yeah, I think people are like sensitive.
Yeah, I think live engineers are going to have to be very aware of that. And, you know, there's also the anxiety of being in a room full of people. And so if you add loud noise on that, you can have like overstimulation.
Yeah,
and I think could be not a comfortable environment at all for a lot of people. And I think I do believe that has to be addressed in a way. Like,
yeah,
we're going to ease back in, you know.
Well, I think that now is a good time to get ahead of the curve and get custom earplugs, or have it ready, because you know, custom plugs can take a few weeks to get. So have it in your arsenal, be ready for it. You know, I do think everyone's, I mean, I stepped into a rehearsal studio at Center Staging a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, you know, I threw my in-ears in just to soften it. It was like overwhelming because I hadn't been in that environment in so long. So I say be ready for it. People are going to be more sensitive for sure.
I want to close out. We're almost at 2 hours, and I really want to take a little bit of time to talk about advocacy. But one thing that I think would also be on the minds of people, maybe particularly audio and monitor engineers, is how do you deal with an artist who you either strongly suspect has hearing loss, maybe has hearing aids, refuses to wear them. How do you navigate that minefield?
Would you like to answer that? Well, I mean, you just have to, I think you have to, if you have to say, I think that we can make things better for you if we know what's going on, if we can see what's happening and make the right corrections. It's going to improve. I think showing them the benefit of improving, you know, if you're a vocalist, improving things so that, you know, if your hearing is, if we address your hearing, it fixes your voice, or, you know, not pushing your voice as much. You can hear better. You don't have to hit the drums as hard, right? So I just think saying, you know, let's look at this. Let's say, how is it going to benefit you? And just knowing what's going on is just going to be good for everybody. And I think people are generally reasonable to that. If they're not, then at least you've said something, you know, you've covered your base. That's all you can do, right? Is suggest, like, let's do this and let's just see, so we can make the best out of this, the show and the performance for you, right? So making it personal.
I would think.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, go ahead.
It can be tricky where you notice that, and like you don't know if the person is aware they might have hearing loss, and like I know I've been in that situation. Like, do I say something and take the chance of maybe offending that person in a way, you know, they're not ready to hear that about themselves. Like, I was in that situation myself, and like the way I've been navigating myself is really going on stage with the performer. Usually it's singers who can't sing properly if they're not hearing what they need to hear, and just being there on stage with them, adjusting their monitors until they're happy, and really taking the time to work with them through that, even, you know, without knowing what their hearing loss might be like. But yeah, if you notice you're just cranking everything and it's how you build.
Yeah, just
like something I remember teaching my students quite a lot. Like, what if, you know, a singer tells you everything is really loud, but I can't hear anything. Like, how do you fix that? How do you make it so you don't make it that loud and the artist can actually hear themselves?
Well, yeah, so they shouldn't have to. I mean, do they have the right in-ear monitors? Do they have, or if they're, you know, actually wearing for a vocalist, wearing a 9 decibel custom earplug, if they're not on in-ears yet, can actually be a really big help, because you hear a little bit more through bone conduction and take the edge off of sound. You're still in it, you know. So getting the right tools to accommodate, instead of, they should not be cranking it up.
No,
you know,
yeah.
not be,
I work mostly myself with the wedges in smaller venues, you know. Obviously that was easier when I could hear the wedge myself, but if they were wearing in-ears, it's impossible to hear exactly what they're hearing if I don't have the same in-ears and all that. So, but yeah, communication with the artist is very, very important.
I think there's probably a stubbornness too. I mean, like, just getting people from wedges to in-ears, like on America's Got Talent, we work with a lot of amateur people, and I don't mean that disparagingly. I just mean that they don't have a lot of experience working with great sound, you know? So it's like getting people to say, like, no, I promise you, that the singers will insist on not using in-ears, and then you say, like, I promise you, we'll take the time to get it just right to make sure that you can hear, because it will, I mean, I know as a singer, when I use in-ears, I sing way better. If I perform online, I mean, I'm going to do a live gig in a couple of weeks for the first time in a while, and I'm going to wear headphones or in-ears for the whole gig, because just I won't over-sing, I won't crank my level up. And I think if someone is having trouble hearing, I think you just have to, like, educate them in a nice way, depending on their personality, on like how well you can make it sound and what are the benefits to being actually able to hear better and not just louder.
right.
And is there a benefit to you as a monitor engineer, if you do have an artist that has a diagnosed hearing loss and they're open and happy to talk about it, should you ask them for their audiogram, and what can you do with that information?
Well, if you have in-ears, you can adjust the in-ears to their hearing test results, but also, yeah, so if that's done, then it takes a lot of the pressure. It's already done that for you. You don't have to over accommodate for it and possibly cause more hearing damage, right? If you're having to turn things up too much. But yeah, I think there's a huge advantage of knowing what someone's hearing is, but then there's also perception, which is different, right? So how you hear it, but that's sort of your job as a monitor engineer, is understanding how your artist perceives sound. But just as a blanket, I mean, hearing loss is what, the third top health issue in the United States. And it's also the one that goes most unaddressed, right? So the more you know, the better you're going to be, the better, easier it's going to make your job, and easier it's going to make it for them to do their thing, right?
Do you think that front of house engineers should be wearing earplugs?
Yes, I do. I think that actually I fit front of house engineers with plugs, and we add connecting cords so that they can hang them here. And
that would be nice.
yeah, and they get the monitor mixed as they like it, and they put the plugs in, and if they need to, they can take it out, and you can do either a 9 decibel or a 15 decibel reduction. And just to have them there, because yeah, I mean, every other night shows, that's a lot, right? And so having that, and if you put them around your neck, then you won't put them down, you know, because I understand you need to take them out, do the room. But yeah, I think it's definitely important. And also to have a hearing test, because you as a front of house engineer don't want to overdo the highs, right? For the audience, you don't need to. So I think it's crucial.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
And a
just
monitor,
to know
for everybody, anyone who's in sound is that's your job. Sound, your world is sound, right? That's where it starts. So I think creating more awareness, doing things like this and talking about it, making people aware of how important it is.
Just a perfect segue into how do we destigmatize this topic as an industry, not only for us as workers in a high-risk environment, but keeping our patrons safe. I think other countries are doing a slightly better job that have stricter health and safety standards. I really noticed it in the European festival scene in the last few years, either free earplugs being handed out or signs everywhere, and even video slides on the side screens saying, you know, earplugs available at these locations. And I think in the US, we haven't gotten close to that level of awareness.
There are OSHA guidelines that you are supposed to follow as a front of house engineer. So
looking at a greater, like, you know, responsibility level, like how, you know,
it starts there. I mean, if you keep,
is it the tour, is it all of us? Like, how do we get there?
yeah, I mean, it starts with the front of house engineer, because they're responsible for the sound level, right? And the managers and everyone else to understand that.
I think too, like, it's a bit of a cultural thing. It's like, why is there this belief that, you know, I want to go to see a show and it has to be loud? Like, why?
Because it releases endorphins. It releases happy hormones.
Yeah. So how do we make people understand, you know, like, if they should have the choice of, okay, you can go damage your hearing and get your endorphins or not?
No, because there are laws that say that you as a front of house engineer are supposed to keep it within certain guidelines. That doesn't mean you're going to, but it starts there, and it starts with managers understanding that. And yeah, I mean, I guess free earplug, but see, the over-the-counter plugs don't sound good, so people generally reject them. So when you're at a show, you want to enjoy it. I guess if you're going often enough, you get custom. I have people getting them all the time. So I did. Now
but
more.
Yeah, I do believe that it's a cultural thing.
Over-the-counter plugs don't sound good.
No, they don't.
Right, but
so
should, you know, should there be free earplugs at every concert, even if, you know, they don't sound good to you because you're used to high fidelity, but your average consumer, it's a question of protecting your hearing. Is that something that should be made available, and whose responsibility is it?
Maybe, I mean, I don't know, free is hard to do, right? Someone's got to make it. There's a price for everything, but having them available certainly would be a good thing. You know, if they include it in the ticket costs, you know, that has to have that available, maybe that's something that could be an option. But again, what if you follow the OSHA guidelines as a front of house engineer and keep everyone in a safe place?
I think it's tough. I think there's an expectation and a pressure that comes from a lot of places that it's not, you know, that's down to the individual. That's a lot of pressure to put on an individual as opposed to, you know, an organization, a governing body.
Yeah, but it is ultimately their responsibility. So let's not make any mistake in that. It's their responsibility, and there have been, frankly, lawsuits over it. So, it's really the front of house. It's part of their responsibility.
Yeah,
And
I totally agree with that. Like in Canada, we do have, like bylaws for different neighborhoods on what level you're supposed to be at maximum, but it's the back. Oh, sorry, I can't find my word. The pushback you get from performers, DJs, and even sometimes the managers are like, this needs to be louder so people, drink more, or whatever it is. It's like,
well,
ugh.
I think you need to make, I know it's a tricky.
Like when your boss is telling you make it louder.
Because but you also need to say, like, if it's unreasonable, you know what I mean? If it's an unreasonable request, it's still on you. At the end of the day, if there's a lawsuit, you're going to be the one in trouble. So I think it's, I think if you're a frequent concert goer, then you have to also take responsibility for yourself.
Yeah.
Right? So
there's some feedback here. It is the artist's responsibility. The front of house engineer is usually mixing as to what they demand and or management. It is not one person's responsibility. And I tend to agree with that a little.
Yes, but who's controlling the knobs?
I think we work with the artist, we don't control the overall volume.
Appear or get fired in some cases. So,
well, I don't know.
This is an easy question, but this is part of the process of having these talks, and also tying into how do we destigmatize this conversation and this subject, professionally amongst us. How and I think this is a first step to that, and doing more of this and finding ways to create awareness, not only in terms of safety at the shows, but our own personal safety.
Right. Taking it upon yourself. Right. Like what everything is, right?
I think that's probably all the time we have. There's still so much more I feel like we could talk about, but do you guys have any closing remarks? I mean, as two people with hearing loss, speaking to potentially a lot of people that may not have hearing loss, like what can you tell people that might instill a greater sense of urgency to take care of what is one of our most valuable resources, which is hearing? Because once you lose it, in most cases, it's not coming back.
Get your hearing tested. I think, as Judy said, annually, I get my hearing tested twice a year because of my progressive hearing loss, so just to make sure I catch everything and get my hearing aids adjusted. But yeah, and take breaks from listening to loud music. If you go back to seeing concerts soon, like give yourself enough breaks for your ears.
But do something about it. Be responsible.
I would say value your hearing. Just value it. I mean, like you said, it does not come back. It can be treated, but like just without treatment, it's not just going to come back. And there isn't, there are cochlear implants and there's amazing treatments, but there isn't like quite the equivalent of LASIK, right? I mean, for eyes, right? And I think if it were our eyes, for whatever reason, people just like, you would never walk around. Like if you had severe eyesight deficiency, you wouldn't walk around or drive without, but people will just go through, like you said, on average 8 years without treating their hearing. I think people just need to value their hearing and like really take care of it. And I struggle with it too. I love having my headphones loud. I have to like remind myself. I do. It's like, I like feeling the music. I like hearing things, and it's tough. It's really, really hard, but you have to take personal responsibility to value your hearing and just understand. But then I would also say to people that if you do start to experience some kind of loss, it's not the end of the world. Don't melt down, don't freak out, and just understand how common it is and how treatable it is. And there are resources for help, and just, really do your due diligence and attend Zoom talks like this.
And I want to say one thing as a mother of 2 children that have hearing loss, imploring people out there that do have hearing loss, particularly if you're a person of some notoriety or fame, if you embrace and talk about it openly and honestly, knowing that 1 out of 12 100 children born has some form of hearing loss. What you can do by giving the gift as a role model to these kids, knowing that they can attain anything they want to in life and they're not going to be prevented from reaching their dreams, is a huge, huge service. So please, if you have artists you know that might be cagey about it, whatever you can do to get people out and loud and proud, you're doing a much bigger service far outside of just this business.
Yeah, actually, I'm working on that with a hearing aid company I work with. We're right now trying to do that. So if anyone has, you know, any artists they'd like to share with me, we're working on that right now. So, you know, artists like Pete Townsend and Roger Daltrey and Phil Collins even have talked about it. So, and Steve Lukather is actually from Toto, is actually an ambassador for Widex, a company I use, talking about technology and talking about hearing. But it's not just about that, it's about hearing conservation. So if anyone has anyone they think would be a good person, and thank you for saying that, I think if you see someone else, it makes it okay, you know, and know that you're not alone. Because
I was going to say, other thing is, like, if you're a normal hearing person, just have patience with people around you that do, you know, and just try to be sensitive. Like, I can handle jokes. I have a tough skin, and, you know, it depends who it comes from with any context of joking about someone. But I think, like, just be aware. It's not always funny to be mock hearing and belittle it, even though, like, sometimes in our discourse, it just seems like, I mean, I had a friend comment when I posted this webinar on my Facebook, someone wrote, huh? You know, like, and it's a friend I know. But if I didn't know them, it would just, you know, I think you just have to we have to be sensitive to, if you're a normal hearing person, just be sensitive and patient with people that aren't. And just, you know, don't, if you have to repeat yourself a second or a third time, try to control your exasperation with, you know, and
yeah,
also.
and I agree. And I think too, with wearing the face mask for this past year and a half, I don't think people realize that that's what hearing loss is like. So the trouble you have hearing people, even if your hearing is normal, wearing a face mask, which I call a low pass filter, that's what it's like. So everyone's actually experienced it this past year and a half. You know, and then you don't get visual cues, which makes it harder, but that's what it's like. So, you know, how frustrated you've been when you haven't been able to hear what that's what it's like. So if there's anything positive that also could come from that too, besides preventing spread of disease, it's that understanding what it's like to not be able to hear clearly, and know that that's, you know, it's nothing wrong with you as a person. It's like putting on the glasses to see more clearly. So
awesome. Well, thank you everyone for your time. I think this has been invaluable, and hopefully we can do many more of these to come. And thanks for everyone listening and watching. And
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, guys. Yeah. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.